Almost everyone pictures compound growth as a smooth, gentle incline, a line drifting upward at a steady, predictable angle, year after year, like a hill you slowly climb without ever noticing much change in the grade. That picture is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that quietly convinces millions of people to quit investing at the exact moment their money was about to start working harder than they ever could. Real compound growth does not look like a hill. It looks like almost nothing happening for years, followed by a sudden, dramatic acceleration that seems to come out of nowhere, a moment where the numbers stop crawling and start sprinting. There is a specific dollar figure where that shift happens, a number where the growth generated by the market itself finally catches up to, and then blows past, the amount of money you are personally putting in every year. For a very ordinary, very achievable savings habit, that number is $75,000. Below it, you are the one doing almost all of the work. Above it, the money starts pulling its own weight, and then some. Most people never see this moment, not because it takes some extraordinary income or a lucky stock pick, but because the years leading up to it feel so flat and so unrewarding that they walk away long before the fire actually catches. They check their account, see a number that barely moved compared to how much they personally put in, and quietly conclude that the whole thing is not really working the way it was promised to. That conclusion is understandable, and it is also exactly backwards, because the years that feel the most discouraging are frequently the years doing the most irreplaceable work behind the scenes, laying down the base that everything afterward depends on. Think about how differently this story gets told depending on which year someone happens to be standing in when they decide to give up. Quit in year 4, and the story is, I tried investing and it barely did anything. Quit in year 8, and the story is almost identical, just with slightly more frustration attached to it, because by then the sacrifice has started to feel real without the reward feeling real yet. Stay past year 9, and the story changes completely, not because anything about the underlying strategy changed, but because the number the strategy is working with finally became large enough to notice. If you have ever looked at an investment account after a few years and thought, this is barely moving, is this even working? Stay with me, because I am about to show you the exact mechanics behind that number, the exact age most ordinary savers cross it, and why the years that feel the most pointless are actually the years doing the most important work of your entire financial life, whether you can feel it happening or not. Meet Michael, 28 years old, working a fairly ordinary job as a marketing coordinator, earning a fairly ordinary salary, with no inheritance, no lucky break, and no special financial knowledge beyond one simple habit he decided to commit to the day he got his first real paycheck. Every single month, without exception, $500 leaves his checking account and lands in a simple, low-cost index fund, $6,000 a year, automated so he never has to think about it or talk himself into it. No dramatic sacrifice, no extreme budgeting, just a habit repeated quietly in the background of an otherwise completely normal life, the kind of decision that feels almost too small to matter on the day he made it. In year 1, his account holds $6,000. In year 2, $12,480. By year 3, $19,476. By year 4, his balance sits at $27,036, and by year 5, it crosses $35,000. Michael is not tracking any of this obsessively. He glances at the number every few months, sees it creeping upward in small, unremarkable steps, and goes back to his normal life, his weekends, his friendships, his ordinary weekday routine. There is nothing about these early years that feels significant. No one at his office knows the balance sitting in that account. There is no dramatic before and after photo, no visible transformation, just $500 leaving his account every month like clockwork, and a number that grows just enough to prove the habit is technically working, without ever growing enough to feel like it means anything yet. If you looked at Michael's life from the outside during these years, you would see absolutely nothing to indicate that anything unusual was happening at all, because from the outside, nothing was. This is worth pointing out clearly, because it matters for anyone watching this who is currently living through their own version of these early years. Michael is not doing anything special. He has not read every finance book available. He has not built a complicated spreadsheet tracking his net worth down to the dollar, and he has certainly not discovered some clever loophole the rest of the world has somehow missed. He simply decided, once, years ago, that $500 a month was going to leave his account automatically, and he has not revisited that decision since, which turns out to be far more powerful than most people assume a single unremarkable decision could ever be. Here is the part of this story almost nobody talks about honestly, the long, flat, emotionally exhausting middle stretch where the math looks like it is barely moving at all. Michael checks his account and sees a number that grew almost entirely because he personally put money into it, not because the market did anything particularly impressive on its own. Meanwhile, friends around him are leasing new cars, booking vacations, upgrading apartments, living visibly well on similar salaries, and Michael is sitting there wondering whether $500 a month is even worth the discomfort of not spending it. There are birthdays, weddings, and weekend trips where everyone else seems to be enjoying their money in ways Michael has quietly decided to postpone, and no one around him has any idea that postponement is even happening, because there is nothing to see, no dramatic story to tell, just a slightly smaller discretionary budget and a habit nobody else finds particularly interesting. This is exactly where most people quit, not because they run out of money, and not because the strategy stopped working, but because they run out of patience watching a number that refuses to move in any way that feels satisfying. There is a quiet, specific kind of discouragement that comes from doing everything right and still feeling like nothing is happening, and it is far more dangerous to long-term wealth than almost any single bad financial decision, because it convinces disciplined people to abandon a plan that was actually on schedule the entire time. Stay with me here, because there is a very specific, calculable point where this entire relationship between effort and reward flips, and once you understand the mechanics behind it, you will understand exactly why the people who quit in year 6 or year 7 are quitting at the worst possible moment, right as the math was about to start rewarding them for the first time in a way they could actually feel. The uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this is that in these early years, Michael's own contribution really is doing almost all of the heavy lifting. The market's help is real, but it is small, quiet, and almost invisible next to the size of his own monthly deposits, which is exactly why this stretch of the journey feels so unrewarding. It is not a failure of the strategy. It is simply what the early stage of compound growth actually looks like when you are honest about the numbers instead of the motivational posters. Nobody puts this part on a magazine cover, because there is nothing visually compelling about a graph that looks almost flat, even when it is quietly doing exactly what it is supposed to be doing underneath the surface, one small deposit and one small percentage at a time, patiently, without asking for any credit along the way. Let's look at exactly why those early years feel so heavy, using Michael's real numbers instead of vague encouragement. At an average return of 8% a year, once Michael's account reaches $6,000, the market itself contributes only around $480 that year, while Michael personally contributes $6,000 from his own paycheck. He is doing roughly 92% of the work, and the market is doing about 8% of it. By year 5, with his account sitting around $35,000, the market's contribution has grown to around $2,800, still less than half of what Michael puts in himself every year. By year 7, with his balance near $44,000, the market is contributing close to $3,500 annually, closing the gap, but still trailing behind his own $6,000 yearly contribution. By year 8, with his balance approaching $64,000, the market's yearly contribution climbs to around $4,300, close enough. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly when they tell you to just start investing early and let compounding do the work. In the early stage of investing, you are the engine, and the market is a passenger along for the ride, contributing a little more each year, but nowhere near enough yet to carry its own weight. That is exactly why this stage feels exhausting and slow, because mathematically, at this point in the timeline, it genuinely is exhausting and slow, and no amount of positive thinking changes the arithmetic sitting underneath it. What makes this stretch particularly deceptive is that the account balance is technically growing the entire time, which creates the illusion of progress without the feeling of momentum. Michael can look at his statement and see a bigger number than last year, and yet something about it still feels flat, because almost the entire increase traces back to his own deposits rather than any outside force working in his favor. This is the exact gap between what the numbers say and what the experience feels like, and it is precisely this gap that causes so many people to walk away right before the numbers and the feeling finally start to match. It is a strange kind of trap, because the very evidence that would normally convince someone to keep going, a rising account balance, is the same evidence that quietly convinces them the strategy is not doing much, simply because they cannot separate their own contribution from the market's contribution just by glancing at a single total. Now here is the moment everything changes, and it happens at a very specific, calculable number, not a vague milestone or a round figure someone picked because it sounded nice. At 8% average growth, the market starts contributing $6,000 a year, the exact same amount Michael personally contributes, the moment his account crosses $75,000. This is the number where compounding catches fire. Below $75,000, Michael's own paycheck is doing more work than the market. Above it, the market is doing an equal or greater share of the work than Michael is, without him lifting a single additional finger, without him increasing his monthly contribution by even $1. Stay with me, because this is the exact point most people give up right before reaching. The flat, frustrating grind that fought Michael for 9 straight years quietly stops fighting back, and starts pulling its own weight for the very first time. There is a simple piece of math that explains why this number lands exactly where it does, sometimes called the rule of 72, a rough shortcut for estimating how long money takes to double at a given rate of return. At 8%, money roughly doubles every 9 years. That single fact is the entire secret behind why the first stretch feels so slow and the later stretch feels so fast, because doubling a small number produces a small increase, while doubling a large number produces a large one, using the exact same percentage the entire time. Michael's habit never changed. The size of the number it was multiplying against did. And it does not stop there, because the market's contribution keeps growing every single year afterward, while Michael's monthly contribution never even needs to increase. It simply stays exactly the same, $500 a month, $6,000 a year, for the rest of his life if he chooses. Meanwhile, the market's share of the work keeps climbing. By year 12, Michael's account crosses $100,000, a milestone that shows up in almost every serious conversation about long-term investing, often described as the hardest $100,000 anyone will ever save, precisely because nearly all of it came from personal contribution during years when the market was barely helping at all. Everything after that first $100,000 behaves completely out. By year 15, Michael's account has grown to roughly $163,000, and the market's annual contribution alone is now larger than his personal yearly contribution has ever been, even in dollar terms he would recognize immediately. The gap between what he puts in and what the market adds keeps widening every single year from this point forward, not because Michael changed anything about his habit, but because the number sitting in that account has crossed the threshold where percentage growth finally translates into meaningful dollar growth. If you are somewhere below your own version of this threshold right now, hold on to that thought, because the next part of this video is going to show you exactly how dramatically the picture changes once that threshold is behind you instead of ahead of you. Stretch the same pattern out across a full career, because that is the timeline that actually determines what kind of retirement Michael eventually gets to have. By year 20, at 8% average growth, his account crosses $274,000, and the market alone is contributing more than $20,000 that year, more than 3 times what Michael personally deposits from his paycheck. By year 25, the account crosses $438,000, and by year 30, it crosses $679,000, with the market's single year of growth at that point exceeding $50,000, more than 8 times Michael's own annual contribution. Read that again, because it is the entire point of this video. In year 1, Michael put in 100% of the growth in his account. By year 30, the market is generating more value in a single year than Michael contributes across 8 full years of his own paycheck. The account is no longer his to push uphill, it is rolling entirely under its own momentum, gaining speed with every year that passes, while Michael's monthly $500 contribution, the exact same amount he started with 3 decades earlier, now barely moves the needle compared to what the market itself is generating on its own. Somewhere around this point, Michael could stop contributing altogether, and the account would still keep growing faster in absolute dollar terms than it did during his most disciplined early years, simply because of the size of the base sitting underneath it. In fact, if Michael stopped every single deposit the day he crossed $600,000 and never contributed another cent for the rest of his life, that account, left untouched at 8% average growth, would still cross $1 million in well under 6 additional years, without a single further dollar coming out of his paycheck, purely from the size of the number it started compounding against. Stay with me, because this is the part that should genuinely change how you think about the next few years of your own financial life, however far along you currently are. The years that once felt like the hardest, slowest grind of Michael's financial life, the years where $500 a month felt like it was disappearing into a black hole that barely grew, turn out to have been the exact price of admission for everything that came after them. There was no shortcut available that would have skipped that stretch, no strategy that would have gotten him to $75,000 without first living through years 8 and 9, watching a number crawl forward one small deposit at a time. It is worth sitting with just how different the first decade looks compared to the third. In the first 10 years, almost every dollar of growth in Michael's account can be traced directly back to a deposit he personally made. In the final 10 years of this 30-year stretch, the majority of the growth in his account has nothing to do with any single deposit at all. It comes from years of accumulated growth compounding on top of itself, quietly, without requiring a single additional decision from Michael beyond the one he already made back when he was 28 years old and set up an automatic transfer he barely thinks about anymore. None of this is a story about luck, timing the market, or discovering some hidden trick that only a small circle of investors happen to know about. Michael did not do anything complicated. He did not pick winning stocks, he did not time his entry perfectly, he simply kept contributing the same modest amount during the years when nothing seemed to be happening, which is precisely the part almost everyone underestimates when they imagine what building real wealth actually looks like day to day. The flat, frustrating middle years are not wasted time, and they are not a sign that the plan is broken, they are the actual mechanism that gets you to the point where the math finally flips in your favor. There is nothing unfair about the fact that early growth feels invisible. That is simply what building the base of something large looks like before it becomes large enough to be self-sustaining. It also does not matter whether your own version of this number lands at exactly $75,000 or somewhere else entirely, because the number itself depends entirely on your monthly contribution and your average rate of return, two variables that are different for every single person watching this.